everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to be talking about a regular game of Airsoft that we played just last weekend. We thought this would be a really good opportunity for us to just have a conversation about what a typical day of Airsoft looks like and how we approach those types of games. And in particular, if you look at that day, lots of things went right. We had a really good day. We had a lot of fun. I mean, at least I'm speaking for myself here, but
Definitely. I had a blast.
But also, several things also did not go so well. There were some things that we were looking out for. There were some things that we were trying to improve on. So we thought that we'd start going through some of these various items to give you a sense of how is it that we approach a typical like everyday or every run of the mill type of game. And that's important because if you've listened to our content before, you would know that we always talk about trying to do better, to improve, trying to push a little harder than you may have done before, like all of that kind of stuff. And the reality is that what that actually looks like in practice may not be exactly what you think, and it might be less intense, less try hard, let's say, than what you might actually think. It's really, for us, a common sense approach. It's a way that we look at certain things, and so we thought we'd go through some of that and recount some of the fun that we had and some of the successes that we had.
Yeah. Mostly when I am running around screaming at Airsoft, you may assume I'm not being tryhard and I'm instead just being goofy.
Yeah. So
um,
let's start out with what the day was what really like started out like, and we'll go from there a little bit. So for us, a typical like Saturday of Airsoft is 3 to 4 hours. It starts around 10 o'clock in the morning. It was a nice sunny day. We had, I think, like 18 degrees. We had like 25 players, which is pretty good for us. Like, it was a good turnout.
yeah, no,
Um,
I mean, weather was fantastic. We'd had a couple of weeks of terrible weather, which meant that
mhm.
everyone was like super jonesing to go out and play, which is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good crowd, a mix of returning players. We had 5 of the Storm Riders there. Um, we had new players like renters as well as like a mixed bag. So it was really all over the place in terms of attendance. But that's always fun, especially when we see new players, young players. Like, we love working with those kinds of people because they're getting their very first airsoft experiences. It's a great way to get them engaged and involved and stuff.
And like a
And
variety of skill levels makes for a lot of fun as well, right?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so in any event, we showed up, and so I was using my rifle, which Pat and I had worked on several weeks previous, but because of the weather, as Pat was mentioning, I didn't have a chance to game it, and we didn't have a chance to really try it out beyond the fact that Pat knew from testing it in his basement with the chronograph and just shooting into a cardboard box, basically, that it was functioning, it was cycling. The issues that we were trying to resolve with the feeding and so on had been resolved. Like, we weren't, skipping shots, et cetera, et cetera. And I had
Yeah.
taken some time the week previous to also clean out my mags, like take them apart, the PTS e-mags, clean out the track and all that. And so I knew that everything was going to be fine on that front.
It's feeding great. I was pretty satisfied with all of the work that I'd done on it. It resolved pretty much all the issues we were having, and invariably there's a but.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, so we show up and I chrono, and it's shooting 1.18 joules, 1.19 joules, 1.2 joules, 1.18. And it's all within that sphere, right? And in that
Really
gun,
consistent.
yeah, well, I mean,
But
it was okay in consistency.
oh,
Um,
maybe not. Okay, I
but
thought it was
like,
doing decent on the consistency, but
yeah, no, it was, within like 0.2 joules either direction, right? So not like tremendously good consistency, but more importantly than that, it's an M110 spring in there. So we know it should be shooting about 1.4 joules, and it's not. When I'm shooting it as well, I noticed that there's something going on with inside the barrel as well, because all of my shots are curving to the right. Now, in Newfoundland, you might tell me, but Phil, there's wind, and yes, there is wind, absolutely. And so when I was shooting across the wind, they were going like mega to the right because the wind was taking them. But when I was shooting in a sheltered area that they have on the field, they were still curving right, and I couldn't adjust my sight to even compensate for all that. So I'm like, this is kind of weird. This is not working exactly how we intended to. But despite that, I actually wasn't that frustrated because although yes, like it wasn't shooting as hot as I would want, although it wasn't shooting as straight as I would want, I could really compensate for both of those things playing our first few games, which were on the village field, close quarters. Your the reliability of your shots. I mean, you're not making like 150, 200 feet shots on the village, right? You're talking about like 50 feet, right? 15 meters, right? Very, very low range. And so I was like, yeah, whatever. So we played a couple games with that, and I wasn't really upset about it. Like it was frustrating on the one hand, and I know from Pat's perspective, as someone who had worked on it, it was frustrating. But in terms of gameplay, I was like, you know what? I'm out here and we're gonna have some fun. Who cares? Right?
I definitely had a few minutes of having to get out of my head about it because there were a few minutes there where I was just like, Rarg, Pat Smash. um,
And it's frustrating because,
but
when you've worked on something, you obviously want it to work, but also we were both sort of perplexed as to, okay, what is actually going on here? Like we don't really know. And
dear gun, why do the thing?
it's hard to diagnose it, right? Like in some cases you have problems with airsoft guns and you can diagnose them immediately because something has broken, it's not working as intended, your motor exploded, your battery is not connected. Like there's a lot of symptoms and a lot of root causes, I should say, that are very evident, right? But in a situation like that, the gun is not working, it is working. And by the way, it was feeding fine. Like aside from like when you know how you when you overfill a mag, like you get like a double feed sometimes, or like the first few shots drop off, etc. That was still happening, but that's normal behavior in my experience for like a mag that's overstuffed. When I filled them at a regular, like 60 to 80 rounds, it was fine. Um, mid cabin syndrome and all that being what it is. So that portion was fine. But the
Yeah,
rest of it, we're
sure.
like, this is weird. Like, why is it doing this thing?
And it's one of these things where, for my money, like thinking about it for a couple of days as I've had a chance to, I'm like, all right, essentially, Phil's gun is doing currently what I would lovingly refer to as hop up bullshit. Right. So I need
Yeah.
to take the hop up apart and play around with it a little and maybe replace their hop patch, maybe just adjust where the max hop up is currently seating and stuff.
Mhm.
None of which is a thing you can do at a game.
Yeah,
Like, it's
that's
just
right.
little parts will be lost in the woods.
And I
So
can
it's just
hear
one of
one
those.
of you in the comments be like, "Oh, you totally can do that at a game." Yes, fine. Yes, sure. Good. You can
I
do it.
I
You should
can,
not.
I won't.
Yeah, totally.
um,
And I mean, there's
you know,
also the possibility that in terms of that, you have other things that's layered on, like the spring, for example, could be worn. I do shoot a lot. It is possible. Is it likely? I mean, we visually inspected it and it seemed fine. And like you're not squishing it with your hands like we did that one time. I remember many years ago, we had took out a
yeah,
spring
yeah.
and we
It's
could
not
actually
like
just compress it and like it would just bend. Like that's no bueno.
yeah, it's not laughably soft. If it is soft, it's just like a little bit,
Yeah,
and that's very resolvable. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's we're gonna get a get a crack at that,
yeah.
in the next week, and get it squared away. But at least it wasn't ruining Phil's day, and ultimately, once I sort of had a brief grumble, it wasn't ruining mine.
And to be honest, a lot of that was mindset, right? So mindset and also reality. Like I knew, and the part of the reason that I wasn't upset is I knew that there was another gun somewhere on the field right now that I could use if I really wanted to. But my gun was still working. And even though I wasn't as effective as I might like, I could still use it, I could still game it. And as we'll talk about later, I would have that opportunity to use different guns anyway. And so
We do
really
have a
my
couple of
mindset,
guns that go Q.
yeah. But like really my mindset was okay, you're here to have fun. Your best bud Pat is here. You're going to be playing airsoft together. We haven't done that a whole lot in the last, little while. You're playing airsoft for the first time in a month. Like, let's go. Let's just have a good time. Johnny's there, Matt's there, Josh is there. Let's just have fun. And that was really
Let us go shoot some people.
that was really what I focused my own mindset on. Like I was like, no, you're here to have fun. Let's have fun. Let's not worry about it. Let's not get frustrated. That'll fix itself. Let's have fun. And I think there is a power to that, right? It's a
Definitely.
different story. I will admit if I showed up and my gun was broken, not functioning, and I had no alternative. That's a real bummer. But that was not my situation. And it was important for me to roll with the situation as it sort of presented itself. Right.
And one of the things I do tend to say to people is that more than people often realize, uh, optimism is a choice, right? like more than people tend to think about it, going, you know what, no, I'm not going to let this ruin my day, is actually really a good approach to things. um Phil is raising an eyebrow because I grumble a lot. But um I think that's a useful thing to bring to airsoft, right? um just, yeah, let's have some fun. Let's not let this ruin whatever's going on.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it worked really well. We had a lot of fun.
Mhm. And
Um
as we continue this conversation, I think part of the reason, as I said, is that I knew that we had all kinds of other guns that I could use if I really needed to. And in point of fact, I knew that Pat had brought two guns that day. He had brought his HPA M27 and his M249, newly minted with some sort of M249 hop up thingy-majig that he will explain better than I did. But I knew that if push comes to shove, Pat cannot use two guns at the same time, especially not both of those guns because they are not what I would consider in dual wield territory. So
yeah,
I
neither of those is a
knew,
one-handed weapon.
yeah, exactly. Like I knew that at some point during the day, I would be using the 249 or Pat's rifle, or perhaps even both, not at the same time again, but like one or the other. And it turns out that that's exactly what happened throughout the day. But I want to talk about the 249 in particular because we've talked in the past about how 249, like an LMG, is not like a super practical gun to have for our airsoft field. And in particular, because of all the different fields that are at our field, full auto fire is not permitted at two of them, which are typically some that, at least one of which, the village, we use a lot. And so if you only have a full auto gun, you're not going to be able to go get on the village with it because it's not permitted there. We're not allowed to shoot full auto in the village or into the village or out of the village, right? So 249 is like, this is a bit dicey. What are we going to do with that? But that being said, um, it was a pretty wild experience.
Yeah, so the two big things I've done with the 249 that are, well, I guess three, from its previous incarnation, are, so I've picked up a CNC machined bull gear hop up unit for it to replace the extremely low quality hop up that it comes with. Um, and it's honestly a bit of a shame that they let them out of the factory with the stock hop up unit. To be completely honest, um, because they're really spectacularly bad,
Mhm.
um, to an extent that I don't think I'd realized honestly until I put the new one in. I've owned a Mark 46 before, and it has the exact same uh, both hop up and gearbox assembly. So like, there's no distinction there really. And I knew previously that like we did a bunch of tinkering with the Mark 46 and we just could never get it working. And I now realize that it's because the hop up unit that was in it just was terrible. So the CNC hop up and a Type bore barrel, I tried towards the end of last summer for a little bit, and it wasn't working perfectly, but it was definitely better. So since then, I've figured out some more things about how to align it when I'm putting it together, which is a thing that you wouldn't think is tricky, but it is an important feature or factor, I should say, really, when you're putting together any of the 249 series guns, because in order to put the battery in, you have to take the barrel out, which someone decided was a good idea. I don't know. But the positive outcome there was I also R-hopped it. This was like, you know what? I have a ready supply of R-hop patches. Let's see if this works out well. And yeah, the results are silly.
Yeah.
Like, it's still not what I'd call an accurate gun. Like, we've done absolutely no work on the air seal. It is bone stock, and it's going to stay that way until I either HPA it or get bored and take it apart sometime this winter. But like, to be completely honest, I was astonished. Like, it genuinely took it from a gun that I thought was a piece of junk that was just not combat effective to a fully functioning airsoft gun for the first time. And we've had, you know, three LMGs available across sort of the history of our team. This 249, which was never ever effective previously. I don't think. Like,
Yeah.
it's, Cal generously donated it to me to torture and turn into something better. Was sort of the hope. very generously, I gotta say. But he hadn't used it in years because it just isn't effective, or wasn't effective. Like stock out of the box, it's a 249 para, and it had no reach whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um,
And then on Saturday, like we were, I mean, like you say, it wasn't super accurate. Like towards the end of the range, when you're looking at, I would say probably 150 feet. So, like looking at like, 50 meters or whatever, you really got a pretty large, like you're hitting targets like probably 5 feet across. Like it's quite large. But that being said, like you said, we did nothing in terms of precision. The only thing you did was put that RHOP patch in and get the new CNC hop up to really make sure that you could maximize the effective range that you were getting from that barrel and unit. And even if it's not that accurate, that still provides some fire to keep people's heads down, right?
well, I mean, that's what I was going to say is, like, it's not super accurate. On the other hand, it has a 1,500 round box mag. So, like, get down.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Like, it's, the big changes are like, so one, like, yeah, you can reach out and touch people, which definitely makes it more effective in terms of pointing at people and getting kills, but also just that extra reach makes it so effective at putting people into cover. um and in particular, I feel that, there's a game type we play along a linear road that is pretty bottlenecky. Like, it's definitely the place I'm happiest to have grenades.
Mhm.
Um, and frankly, when I had the 203, was also the place there that I was happiest to have the 203, just to try to loft some hate downrange. But it definitely provided value in that game mode that often becomes very static, often becomes very hard to push. Partly because volume of fire, partly because now it has effective range, so it's not just shooting a lot, it's shooting a lot effectively. you
Yeah.
know but also, like, it definitely adds some intimidation value. It is a bit of a loud gun that doesn't hurt, but just people go, oh, I don't want to poke my head out, there's a lot of BBs coming down range.
Definitely.
um
And
and
on the flip side, I will say that I also had the chance to use the 249 for one game in particular. And we were fighting along the road for for a part of it as well. There absolutely is a truth to like the heaviness of the gun and the wieldability for someone. And in my case, I'm not a particularly, I would say, weak individual. I'm not like Papa Swolio, like I'm not huge, but I'm also not super super strong. Um and even still, I found it pretty unwieldy compared to my regular kit. Like it was much harder for me to get around. It was much more tiring to get around, much more tiring to get on target and stay on target compared to a smaller compact rifle like mine or the HPA that I was using for parts of the game. And unfortunately, when I used the 249, was a game where at some point Johnny and myself were basically left by ourselves getting trying to fight off a larger enemy team, and so we needed to be highly mobile, and it was the time for us to get moving, get around, like move from cover to cover, put fire down, keep moving, etc. And that is made absolutely more difficult when you have a like an airsoft replica that is quite heavy. And the 249 absolutely is quite heavy. There's no two ways about it. Like it's compared to all the other airsoft guns that I was using that day, like definitely the heaviest, right?
But at the same time, it's not unmanageably so. And I think, from a practical point of view, for random games at Frontline, like for most of the play we do, I definitely enjoyed gaming it, and I definitely feel like I had enough fun that I'll make sure I stuff it in the bag.
Totally. And I definitely had fun
um,
too. I think where I'm getting at with this is that like it's not suited to every task. I can do
oh, definitely.
everything with my rifle. I can do everything with your rifle. Um, and we can even hose if we need to. You can switch it to auto. Although I actually played a game with your HPA, and I played a game with my rifle, and I forgot that your gun could do full auto. I just didn't even think about it. Right. So we don't use it very often, but we can if we need to. Right. But when you have an LMG that only does full auto, well, I mean, what else are you going to do? Right. you squeeze that trigger, right? Burst or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I found really interesting about running the LMG for the games that I was running it, honestly, was, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, was I was a lot more aggressive with it than I often am. Both in terms of like shot volume. All right, fair enough. Auto. It only has one button. Might as well use it.
Yeah.
But also in terms of like pushing up and being like, oh, there are people up here. I'm gonna put their heads down. I'm just gonna get up in their business. And that was really, really effective.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? Well, it means that I need to rethink how aggressive I'm being with my regular kit, because sure, the M27 doesn't have a 1500 round box mag. But also, if I shoot 2 rounds at someone's head, they're going to get hit in the face twice.
Yeah.
At most of the ranges I was using the LMG at, where the LMG is like, well, if I hold the trigger down, that guy over there is going to get hit eventually.
Him or his buddy next to him, right?
It's in its current state, the LMG is a little bit of a to whom it may concern.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great way of putting it. But it's
but
interesting though, because you talk about the M27, and that's the other part of this is I did get a chance to use your M27, and again, this is another type of airsoft rifle that really I am not as accustomed to using. So Pat's M27 is quite long; it's longer than my rifle. It has a magnified optic, which in fairness to it, it's a low power variable optic. So like it can be 1 or it can be up to 4, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And it's HPA, right? So all of those things are like not typical Phil.
This gun does a lot of things
right?
Phil's not used to.
And so I decided that when we played a road game, that I would use it, and I would use it in more of dare I say, a designated marksman way, which is to say, instead of being upfront and like smashing people's teeth in, literally or figuratively,
Which is his normal approach.
which is my normal approach. Yeah, I was going to stay much further back, and I would use the magnifier to my advantage and hit targets at longer ranges. And do you remember what I said to you when I came off the field?
I don't remember exactly. I remember you came down off the field and I was like, okay, so that gun was hitting me at a range I didn't think it could hit me at.
Yeah.
What the hell?
What I
And
exactly
I'm the one who both built it and usually uses it.
Yeah. What I exactly said was that felt like cheating, because I was in a position where it was relatively hard to hit me because I was at a longer distance. But really, I was putting the crosshairs on a target, I was pulling the trigger, and that person was being hit. 1 or 2 shots, probably 2 shots. Although I will say I did have some trouble shouldering on the left-hand side. That didn't work so well. Just because getting my sight picture on the left side with the magnifier, blah, 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 wasn't ideal. Given some practice, I probably could get it. But like in the middle of a game where I have literally never done this before, right? Yeah. So, anyways, all this to say, I tried getting all that, and on the left side didn't work so well. But on the right side, my strong side, I was putting the crosshairs on people. Probably at the very least, I'm gonna say 120 meters. 120 feet, like 40 meters away. Let's say. And I was pulling the trigger once, twice, and they were getting hit over and over and over. And although I was doing really good work on our side, overall we couldn't get the advantage, and our right side fell, and eventually I was hit, and that was the end of that. But wow, what a tremendous difference. Would I want to do that every single game? Like, no, I do like kicking the door, so to speak. But it really goes to show that you can do a lot with this kind of stuff. Like there's a lot more to it. And once you get it dialed in, man. Yeah.
I definitely also, I want to say, because just talking about like playing with different stuff, because Phil was using my rifle, I hadn't been shot at with the foam in the suppressor from any kind of distance, right? So like I know what it does to the rifle when you're behind it or like next to it, but I had no idea what it does from like 20 feet away. And that is a real thing if you're using HPA. Like that gun doesn't make any noise.
Yeah.
So if I were prone somewhere and concealed, you're not gonna find me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny,
which is like things to do.
When I watch the GoPro footage from that day, I can listen to the footage with me shooting the gun and stuff, your gun, and then compare it immediately to the same footage of me shooting the 249 or shooting my gun, and it is vastly different in terms of sound. Like when I'm pulling the trigger in the on the GoPro, you can't with the HPA, you all you hear is click click click. Like that's all you're hearing compared to, all the other sort of sounds that are going on around you. Like it's really really cool. But I digress. All this to say, like it was a very very interesting experience, right? To be using that rifle in a, not only a different rifle, but a different rifle in a different way. Because I would never play the field that way, right? Not unless I was really screwed with my rifle. I would never play the field that way, just because that's not what I do, and that's not what I'm set up to do, right?
And yeah, I mean, one of the one of the funny things about like takeaway for me is, so like I said, I kind of need to be more aggressive with that rifle perhaps than I have been. Like I can definitely do more than I've been doing in that particular playstyle.
Mhm.
It also has a barrel extension and stuff on it, so I might pick up a shorter inner barrel to try like shortening it up a little bit at some point just for fun. I'm not super motivated to because it shoots real good right now.
Mhm.
But definitely adjusting that approach. I mean, technically the M27 is also was designed to be a support weapon, and I've have put a HPA setup into it with auto. So I'm a little tempted to try to like pick up maybe a box mag for it just for the sake of being a vile, awful human being. Um, Phil is shaking his head, but in a less judgmental fashion than he might have a week ago.
Yeah. Now that I remember that it does do full auto, um, which I really would have liked when we played that D-Day game. That would have been great. And I completely forgot. We have
I
a
bring you the
field.
gift of suffering.
We have a field at our field called the D-Day, and basically what it is we've talked about it before, I think, but there's like two bunkers at the end that are on an elevated area, and they're like two bunkers and like sandbags, and then the field leading up to it is relatively flat with a number of trenches and like tank traps and a bunch of other stuff. And so the objective of the game when we play is the attackers have unlimited lives, the defenders have limited lives, but there's a time limit of 15 minutes. So or 10 minutes or what have you. And so the objective is for the attackers to run up the field and try and get to the bunkers. And if they get to the bunkers and over the side, then they win. If the defenders hold out for the entire time, then they win. And typically, the defenders are the ones who win. That's usually how that goes, because defending those is a relatively easy task when you consider that the people up there have better cover, they don't have to expose themselves, and they've got range. Whereas the attackers have to cross literal open fields in order to make their way up. And yes, there's more of them. But ultimately, like once you get close enough, generally you're only going to have a couple people up front, and it's going to be really hard for them to make that final push to get to the bunkers. And
Yeah, it's a game type that is very much about trying to put the heads of the defending guys down, because if they can shoot, you're done.
yeah, yeah, totally. And so we had myself and Matt from our team, and everybody else from the team who was playing that game was defending. And then we had a bunch of renters, randoms, who were attacking with us. And so we decided to, I should say, I decided that I would share a strategy that Cal had tried many many years ago to get people organized. Because the fundamental thing about that field is, like Pat said, you cannot advance if the other team's heads are not down; they're not taking cover. And in order for that to be effective, you need to coordinate it. So we came up with a tactic whereby we divided the team into two groups. One group would fire, and by fire, I mean they would hose the bunkers in full automatic fire for like 3 seconds, 3 full seconds, like a full burst, while the other group moves up to the next piece of cover, and then they swap, right? So literal bounding
Basically,
Overwatch.
rip a mag.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we were starting out, I was checking everybody, especially the beginners, to be like, "Hey, do you have enough ammo to do this? Do you need mags? Are you good to go? Are you all set?" We divided into two. And then the game started before we could get in position. So the start of it was a bit of a shit show. But we eventually managed to get into the position where I was basically at the front of the line, like at the front of the spear, and I was in cover looking back at the people, and I was coordinating with Matt and saying, "Okay, Matt, get your guys to hose," and then they would come out and they would hose the field, and then the other guys would move up to me, and then we would reverse. And that's when I would have liked to have full auto on the HPA, and by that I mean remember that I had it, because I was going crazy semi spamming, basically trying to get as many BBs as I could on there, while other people were moving up. In any event,
What Phil is saying here is the gun had an option to make his life easier, and all he needed to do was flip a switch.
yeah, you got it. But anyways, the point is, we played that game. We managed to get organized, and as the attackers, we managed to win in just under 5 minutes, which is pretty good. It's not, I think, our record. I don't remember what the field record is. We played one game and we just completely smoked it. But yeah, so we managed to do it in less than 5 minutes, and it was really fun. And it was really fun for the people who are working with us. I'd say it probably wasn't quite as fun for the defenders, but I mean, what do you want? Can't win them all. But it was really fun for us, and more importantly than this, a lot of the people who we were playing with were new players, right? They were new players. They were, renting for the first time. Their gear was all over the place. There was a guy with plate carrier, wasn't even like tied down. Like, it was just a complete nightmare in terms of their setup. But they had an amazing time, right? They won, which is great, and you got to feel like a badass, right? Basically, you're there, and you got two guys, myself and Matt, shouting at them to shoot and full auto, and you get to full auto, which is super fun.
So there's no doubt on the part of the new players as to whether or not what they're doing is effective, because they're watching it put people's heads down, and then they get to see the team win a game mode that, frankly, if they've rented there before, they've probably lost.
Yeah, right? No, absolutely. It was,
let's be real, for all that we've definitely crushed a bunch of versions of that game, we've also lost a bunch of versions of that.
Absolutely, yeah. But so it really reinforced the fact for me of really thinking tactically about, okay, what are you trying to achieve, coming up with a strategy, trying to put the plan into motion, coordinating. And to be honest, that is not something I had done for a long while. It was not something I had done for a long while, because usually I get put on the team with the defenders, which is fine. But it's not typically that we have the opportunity to work with such a large group of players and really get organized, to come up with a strategy, and have everyone sort of be gung ho to give it a go and do our best, right? So it was a really good experience, and I was able to do that with the M27, even the long rifle, with an HPA line, and be as aggressive as I realistically could be. Like I said, I was right at the front with those guys up until the very last second. And I was, doing just fine. Did I hit anybody that game? I don't even know.
But it is also a game mode where, like, realistically, the goal is to get over the finish line. And so, like, don't get me wrong, getting kills is nice, but it's not important to success in that approach, in that game mode.
And I'm pretty sure that the guy who won the game for us was a beginner, was like a renter or someone, like a new guy. I'd never seen him before. But I was at the front, like in the last trench, basically, before you have to go up and then cross that open area where there's no trenches, no cover, and actually get behind the bunkers or whatever. And there's four guys
run
there.
The last 15 feet to the bunkers. Enjoy.
Yeah, and there's four guys there with me, and they're like, I don't have any ammo left. And I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, when they start shooting, we're gonna go. And so, we started shooting, and then they went, and I told them, like, if you whip around the right side, you'll be able to get right around. And two of them got shot right off the rip, and then the other two, like, made it around the corner. That's how you win that game, right? So it was a good experience. Yeah.
It's all about pushing bodies upfield.
And doing so and coordinating, right? I think it doesn't have. This plan was not overly complicated. Like, it was and I think we talked about this, I think, in a podcast before, but like, there's this tendency for people who get into strategy and into like leadership roles to overcomplicate significantly what needs to be done, both in terms of what is a realistic plan that you can execute on the field, but moreover, what is a realistic plan that you can actually effectively communicate to the people who you're working with, right? And so when you're working with a group of completely brand new beginners, right, you can't, the complexity of the plan that you're going to try and share with them, it has to make sense to a layperson who doesn't know anything at all about airsoft tactics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have to be like, hey, when he says shoot, hold down the bang switch for 3 seconds, right? Like, it has to be that sort of simple.
But I mean, like, it's one of those funny things where, tactically speaking, keep it simple, stupid is a really great idea, because once the adrenaline starts pumping, people are not as clever as they might otherwise be anyway.
Yeah. The other thing that I think was really great about that is that you had a really good will from the beginners to push up and be aggressive. And part of the reason why was because we were leading by example, right? So I was at the front and Matt with my group, and Matt was at the front with his group, right? So anybody who didn't want to take part or who was, concerned about getting hit or whatever, they were behind. It wasn't me yelling at them to push up past me. It was like, hey, I'm up here, get your ass with me, right? So that we
Yeah.
can move on to the next part. And Matt was doing the same
Come
thing
on,
on
guys,
his
let's
end.
go.
Exactly, right? It's like there was a part of the game where I'm in the trench and I'm doing the thing that we always say never to do, but like my back is against the back of the trench and I'm looking backwards towards our start line and I'm seeing people behind pieces of cover, right? And I'm talking to Matt and being like, "Hey, you need to shoot because I need to get these guys up to me," right? And just doing that over and over. Anyways, I digress because it was definitely an exciting part of the day, but really, you feel very effective, very good when stuff is working to that, to your advantage, and people are buying into it. Because if you got hit and then didn't buy into it, and you start, you quit, then it's a lot harder for everybody else to succeed, right?
Yeah, well, and it's really good when everyone is pulling together, right? Like, that's one of the benefits of team sports, of working as a team in anything. Um, you know, but yeah, like, especially when you do it and it works out and you win really a solid way in a difficult game mode, it's really rewarding.
Yeah.
It's a rich experience.
And not to mention that the only thing the attackers have to their advantage in that game is numbers. So if you got people sitting back not doing anything, you have no advantage anymore, right? So yeah.
Yeah, like, it's one of those things where it only is winnable, I think, with a team that's motivated and actually trying to, like, push up and be aggressive.
Yeah.
And so, I think for anyone who's playing at frontline, like, it's a good idea to work on developing those skills of, like, pushing that aggressively and getting people motivated to join you in pushing that aggressively, because it's going to work better for whatever our hypothetical player is,
Mhm.
you know. But it's also a lot of fun to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun to be on the team that is putting the other team's head down and just going, yeah, like, let's push up, let's rock this. And I think, it's also um, a game mode where the LMG is probably pretty effective.
On
You
both
know,
sides.
oh yeah, totally. I mean, like, yeah, put the LMG in cover in a bunker and hold trigger down while enemy tries to attack into it. Yeah, that'll work too. You
Yeah.
know. But yeah, I think that the weight of fire aspect is valuable regardless, probably, of what you're using.
Yeah.
But it definitely is workable with both pieces of gear. I do think, um, for the D-Day field, I think the LMG is probably better in the hands of someone who's a little bigger. Like, I'm not stronger than Phil in terms of fitness by any stretch, but just the fact that I'm a big dude means that it impacts my movement less.
Yeah, definitely. I
You
would
know,
not have wanted to have the LMG um in my hands for that game, just because again, like, mobility was such a critical factor. I will say though, we talk a lot about how we often come off the field and like, okay, how could that have been better, right? What could we have done differently? And that's the first game in a long time where I walked off the field and I'm like, literally nothing that was within our control could have been better than what we did. I don't think there's any way that we could have done any better realistically with with the situation that we were in. Now, yeah, it would have been great if the game had started when we were in position and we didn't scramble for the first little while. Like, that would have been great, but that wasn't within our control. What was within our control was how did we recover once the game started sort of underneath us, and we had to get in position. I mean, all that was great, right? So I can't really think of any sort of way that I could, like, if you asked me to go do that again right now, I would do the exact same thing, right? Which I think is a pretty good indicator that it was a really good experience, a really good execution, a well thought out plan, and ultimately, very successful. So, when we talk about looking for improvement, that doesn't necessarily mean there's always a way that it can be better. In some cases, there's not, right? And that definitely is one that sticks out in my memory.
Yeah, and I mean it's fun because I mean he's got one thing he could do better, which is remember that there's an auto switch on the gun. Um, but like I mean it still worked pretty flawlessly.
Hmm.
Um, you know I I came away from the weekend with a couple of even better ifs that were mostly related to like getting the LMG tuned a little more.
Hmm.
Had some feeding issues, figured those out. Had some um, the box mag wasn't charged enough of issues, you know. But I had a huge amount of fun. Um, I am having to work really hard to restrain myself from just buying a drop-in HPA kit for the LMG. And realistically, that's probably going to happen between now and next season. I'm just going to be smart and put the money away for it over time instead of dumping it out of my wallet right now like a fool.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I had a huge amount of fun. I am super stoked to play again this coming weekend, and I'm probably going to bring both guns again because it was just hilarious.
And realistically, my gun's probably not going to be, in operation by then. So there's that. But I digress.
It's true.
Um,
I
you
mean,
know,
we can hope, but yeah, fair.
yeah. One of the other things that I sort of want to leave on is we had a really good turnout, as I said, and there was a lot of people there who didn't necessarily, know who we are, which is fine. Not people that I've seen before. And there are a few people there who I know are sort of just starting out airsoft, and they've been there a couple of times and stuff. And one of the things that I actually took a lot of time out of my day on Saturday to do was to go and talk to those people and just be like, hey, how's it going? Are you enjoying yourself? Is everything fun? I had some Storm Rider stickers, and I gave them out, and I said, hey, this is our team, this is our podcast, you should check it out, all this kind of stuff.
They're
And I'll
holographic. Rad.
Yeah. And, like, that's all cool, like, that's fine, but more so than that, is just getting to know people and not being, again, intimidating or intimidated by other players. Like, they might see me and go, "Oh, I can't talk to that guy," but if suddenly that guy comes to talk to you, it's like, "Oh, it's not so bad." There's a young kid there who's asking us all kinds of questions. It's like, "Hey,
He was great.
absolutely." Right? And overall, in talking to people, that's how I learned that someone wanted to play D-Day. And so they said, one of the games we are playing, they're like, "Oh, I hope we get to play D-Day because I bought a smoke grenade." And so I went to the ref and I was like, "Hey, we should play D-Day. There's someone here who wants to play D-Day. And I don't know if they feel comfortable asking for it, but I'm saying that's what we should do." And he was like, "Okay." And we played D-Day. And coming off the D-Day field, I heard the guy being like, "Oh, I'm so glad I got to use my smoke grenade today." Like, that's a great experience, right? And that would not necessarily have happened if myself or somebody else hadn't taken some time to go and just talk to people, interact, and see how are you doing, and I know you're having fun. And I know that's not
Just
everybody's cup of tea. Like, I know Jordan, in on the Discord is really good at talking to people, of people not so comfortable. But there's a lot to be gained by doing that. And I don't mean like gaining followers on our YouTube or like people listening to our podcast. And if they do, that's great. And if they don't, I also don't care. Like, it's more about building a community that people want to be a part of, that people are, feel is welcoming, right?
yeah, I mean, I've been there's a couple who've been playing. It is apparently the thing they do on Saturday. They get a babysitter and come out and play yourself. Like, how rad is that?
Hmm.
Um, and so I've been chatting with them over the summer and getting to know them because they're cool, chill people.
Hmm.
But like they're super fun to hang out with in between games. Have a chat. And like there's definitely a lot of like, oh, like you got me good, like fist bump as well, which is really, really wicked. I gotta add to what Phil was saying about the younger kid who was playing, who's like, definitely pretty new. But like he's very, very motivated. He has a solid understanding of like, yeah, no, I'm small, so like I can get real down behind this cover and like make good use of that. He has a really can-do attitude, which is awesome. Um, and like he asked a million questions. But like, and not just because he's a kid, but like, yeah, that's what you should do, right? If you're talking to a veteran player and they're receptive, ask them questions, right? Learn stuff. I literally, literally on my to-do list is, get another lesson in how to use cover better from Cal because like he does that shit for a living. And it's definitely a thing I could do better. But um, yeah, I think being open to learning is really important. But yeah, talk to people,
Yeah,
right? And I mean, I'm a
absolutely.
very gregarious human. I I'm a teacher. I talk to people for a living. Um, but even if you're not as much a gregarious person, even if you're not as much a person, try to get out of your shell. Try to make some friends. Right? This is a hobby, but it's way better when there's a community and when the community is good and dedicated and open to like hanging out and working together and playing together and having more fun.
And that's absolutely true as well. Like if you're in the type of community where your community is large enough that you can't represent an entire community, right? You know, in some of these places where you've got 100 players coming out to a game or 200 players coming out to a game, like you don't have the sense of community like we have because we're, a smaller group. You might be representing your team, right? And the same exact thing still applies. Like if people start seeing you show up at the field and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's so and so team. They're really cool. They're really chill. Like they always, have a conversation. They're always willing to help. They always want to take the new guys." Whatever that reputation that you build for yourself is, that helps create an environment that is welcoming and where people are more willing to work with you and collaborate and like try different stuff on the field, whether that's different tactics, strategies, game modes, whatever, right? And ultimately, like Pat was saying, you have a young guy coming to the field asking a million questions, feeling comfortable enough to ask, a million questions and whatever. Like people like that are what is going to keep our sport, you know, ongoing, right? And continuing and growing. And if our response is, "Oh, well, piss off, kid, you're annoying," or whatever, like what kind of environment are we creating where these players want to keep coming back? It's the same thing on social media platforms where you have Discord that are toxic, or on, the Airsoft subreddit. Like if you treat people poorly, they're not going to want to keep coming. Right? They're not going to want to keep coming back to Airsoft. They're not going to want to play with you. They're not going to have a good time. And that's just a really not fun experience. We're here to have fun. We're here to enjoy what we're doing, and you can absolutely create that environment in your communities by reaching out to people, by being friendly. Does that mean that you have to, be friends with everybody? Absolutely not. But it does mean that going and being friendly with people does go a long way to creating the kind of community that you want to be in. Now, if you're a misanthrope, well, then you probably picked the wrong sport, I would say. But also,
It's a weird hobby for someone who hates people that much, but like yeah, you know,
yeah, like if you're, all the people who we talk to on the Discord, all of you in our community who we talk to daily, weekly, um, some of the people we might talk to more often than you care to, whoever you are, right? We know that community matters for you, Airsoft matters to you, and there's so much to be gained by going out there and being a positive force at your field, at your games, in your communities. And I really got a good taste of that this weekend, and I thought it was important for me to just rehash that. It doesn't mean that you have to give stickers out either. If you have them, I don't know some teams in Jordan we were talking about in particular, they have pair stickers for the operators. Great, awesome, give them out. But if you don't, I mean, just a friendly word, a hi, how's it going? Like all of that goes a long, long way to making a friendly and welcoming community.
yeah, and it's really like as much as anything else, about smiling. And like I've joked before about the fact that I have, you know, I've been the grumpy guy at Airsoft because I'm not a morning person, but like, I mean, the coffee helps, but it's worth noting that I make more of an effort than I used to just be, gregarious for all of Airsoft as opposed to grumpy for the first 45 minutes and then gregarious after.
Yeah, totally.
once I, once I get shot in the face, once I'm awake and it's all good, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to add, because I would be completely remiss in not mentioning this. So I ran my Delta mic for the first time this weekend, and I forgot I was wearing it for most of the day.
Mhm.
Like I legit cracked a water bottle to take a drink and bumped it off the thing and was like, "All right, there's something on my face." It is so comfortable. This is the first game I swear in like 15 years where I have not worn my Shima.
Yeah.
That was super weird, but
Yeah,
they
that's a
are
good point.
so comfortable and like I think net I probably paid about 50 Canadian for it, shipping included, because we did a big group order, and definitely a really worthwhile piece of kit. Like
Yeah,
you know,
not a sponsor. We are not sponsored by them. Although we,
no,
Delta Mike, hit us up. We are open. But yeah, and I had a chance to use the Mark II Delta mic. So I had the Mark One previously. Now I have the Mark II, and it's exactly what you expect, except just a little bit better, right? So if you're
Yeah.
using the Mark One, I wouldn't necessarily say go out and rush and get a Mark II. But if you don't have any Phase Pro right now, like Pat was saying, Delta mic is absolutely
Yeah.
worth the money.
It's superlative, I gotta say. Like it's moved right into the space with my chest rig and with my sling, where I'm just like, this is optimal equipment. I do not need to adjust this. I don't foresee replacing this in the future.
Yeah.
Like 10 out of 10.
But yeah, so that's all we really have for you. So go out, get yourself a Delta mic, and let us know how it works for you if you don't already have one. But yeah, that this was our weekend of play. I hope that this has been helpful for you guys. Make sure you leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you want to join the Discord, the link is in the description. We'd love to have you join. We have new people coming in every single day. We have a very inclusive, very accepting community, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. But until then, that's all we got for you.
Thanks everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.